5 Sundays on Moses is never enough. I mean, that's almost a joke. Moses takes up more material in the Old Testament than anyone else does. But we're going to come to the end of Moses' life, and we're going to look at an incident in his life that tragic but gives me hope. I hope it will to you as well. And we're going to spend most of our time today in a strange book, the book of Numbers. Called Numbers because of the Greek translation. That's not the name of it in Hebrew, but it came over into our Bibles through the Septuagint, and so it's called Numbers. It's the third of, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, fourth of the Pentateuch. And it basically is a book which, you start out of all things with numbers. That's why it's called Numbers. And, of course, if you're doing your daily Bible reading, you're like, you got to be kidding. I really don't care how many people were in the tribe of Issachar. I really don't care about that, And you get all of these numbers, and you're reading it, and you're just trying to get through with it as quick as you can. And if you're not careful, you miss some amazing lessons that the Holy Spirit is trying to teach us in this book about Moses. And so we're going to begin in Numbers 1, verse 1, of all places. And the Lord spoke to Moses in the tent of the meeting in the desert of Sinai on the first day of the second month of the second year after the Israelites came out of Egypt. And you're like, all right, it's already boring already. I get it, okay? But basically the book begins by saying they've come out of Egypt and they spent a little over a year at Mount Sinai. Okay? God's giving them the 10 Commandments. He's giving them the rest of His law. Moses is writing this stuff down. They're building the tabernacle. A lot of stuff is going on. And so it's time now to move from Sinai up to Canaan and invade the land. Now, we know from last week what happened as a result of that. But before they head up there, God says, I need you to count the people. I need to know how many men above the age of 20 we have as we get ready to go into the land of Canaan. And so they take a census of all the different tribes, and there's 603,550 men. Now, you think about the population of Nashville. That's about our population, I think, something like that. And so there's a lot of people. And by the way, this is just the men. This is not the children under 20. This is not the women. And so there's a lot more people there. 3, 4 million is hard to guess because of how many children they would have had back then. But there's a lot of people. Now, what's fascinating about this is that when you get over to chapter 26 of Numbers, you have the census a second time. And notice the language. Take a census of the whole Israelite community by families, all those 20 years old or more who are able to serve in the army of Israel. Now you go, why 2 censuses? There are 2 censuses because there's been 40 years since the first one to the second one. Now we take a census every 10 years. But in this case, they did it in 40 years. And the reason for that is because Israel had wandered in the wilderness for 40 years. And as a result of that, all the people that you read in the first census, practically all the people had died in that 40-year period. And so everybody who had been counted, all of those men, including all the women, anybody above 20, they've all now died, with the exception of Joshua, Caleb, Moses. You've got a few that are still left, but they'll die before they actually enter into the land. And so here they are, and they take this second census, and the numbers drop to 601,730. And you go, why did the number drop? You had a lot of people to die. And of course, we'll look at and be reminded as to why they died here in just a second. In Numbers chapter 2, you have something else that's fascinating. You have the arrangement of the tribal camps. As they are going to be spending 40 years out the wilderness, how do they camp? How did God want them to be organized? Did you just go out there, find a rock somewhere, and throw a tent up? No. You camped in a very specific way. And here's a picture, just kind of an illustration, as best as we can determine. You had the tabernacle in the center with the cloud, the pillar of cloud by day, the pillar of night by pillar of fire by night, all representing the presence of God. And then right in front of the tabernacle, you have the tents of Aaron and his 2 sons, who are the priests. and the tent of Moses. Okay, they're right there in front of the entrance into the court of the tabernacle. And then around the tabernacle, on the other three sides, right up next to the curtain, are the tents of the Levites. God has chosen the Levitical tribe to be the tribe that takes care of the tabernacle. Later, they'll take care of the temple. Okay? John the Baptist's parents were Levites. I mean, that's why, and not just Levites, but in this case, priests. And so these are the people who would have encamped around the tabernacle in order to take care of it. And then on the outer side of the tabernacle are the 12 tribes. 3 on each side. 3 to the east, 3 to the north, 3 to the west, 3 to the south. And of course they're there in order to focus on God in the middle, and then those who serve God next, and then the people in general as they go further out. Now you go, why is that important? It's important because of what is fixing to happen in the rest of this book. Because what you're going to watch is you're going to watch Israel rebel. And they're going to rebel in groups. And it basically begins on the outside, and then it moves in closer, and then it moves all the way in to the front of the tabernacle. And you see Israel as a people rebelling against God, and God's forgiveness as well as the consequences of their rebellion taking place. And so you have the first rebellion, which is the people. That's what we looked at last week, Numbers 13 and 14. And so all of those who lived on the outside, when they finally got to Canaan's land and they spied out the land, their response was, we can't attack those people. They're stronger than we are. The land devours them. We're like grasshoppers to them. In fact, if only we had died in Egypt or in the wilderness, why are you bringing us to this land to fall by the sword? And they get to the end and they said, we need to choose somebody to take us back to Egypt. And of course, God's like, you got to be kidding me. And Moses pleads for them. I mean, he begs for God to forgive them. And God said, I will forgive them. But let me tell you what's going to happen. In this wilderness, your bodies will fall. Every one of you, 20 years old or more, who are counted in the census and who's grumbled against me, not one of you will enter the land I swore with uplifted hand to make your home. God says, all right, all of you who live on the outside of the tabernacle, all of you, 20 and above, are going to die. Now, God's forgiven them. It's not like they're going to, go to hell as a result of what they've done. But what happens is God says there's consequences you've got to pay because of your rebellion against me. And that consequence is you can't enter the land. The second rebellion is a strange one. The Levites rebel. You get closer to the tabernacle. You've got the people, they rebel. And then about 2 chapters later, you have the Levites that rebel. Led by a man by the name of Korah. And Korah is basically, okay, why does Aaron get to be the priest? He's a Levite. We're Levites. We all should be priests. And so they challenge Moses. I mean, Korah gets a big group together, and they go up and they challenge Moses. And Moses, again, he's frustrated. And so he goes to God, and God says, all right, call them out. And basically they all come out, and Moses gives a speech to them. Moses said to Korah, now listen, you Levites, isn't it enough for you that God of Israel separated you from the rest of the Israelite community? Brought you near to himself? I mean, they're right by the tabernacle. And you do the work of the Lord's tabernacle? He's brought you and all your fellow Israelites near himself, but now you're trying to get the priesthood too? You see the rebellion. And so God says, all right, tell them to come out with their censers. Moses, you and Aaron, and his sons come out with their censers, and I'll choose which side I'm on. And so they come out. I mean, it's an old-fashioned, I'll meet you, out front at noon, and we'll see who's going to win this duel. And, of course, God steps in as they're standing there, and as soon as Moses had said this, the earth opened its mouth and swallowed them. Their households, all of those associated with Korah, together with their possessions, they went down alive. I love verse 33. They went down alive into the realm of the dead. I mean, you got to appreciate the irony of that. With everything they owned, the earth covered over them, and they perished and were gone from the community. And basically the picture is here they are. They're opposing Moses. God says, I'm on Moses' side. Ground opens up, and swallows all of Korah and his followers. And then closes back over. And everything's gone. And you're like, okay, I think I know which side God's on. You know, you're kind of like, all right. And so you have the Levites rebel. But it's the next one that always catches us off guard. Because as you go in closer to the tabernacle, the only ones left is Moses and Aaron. And it's Moses and Aaron that now rebel against God. Notice the chapters, 13 and 14, the people, 16, Korah and the Levites, and then 20, you have Moses rebelling against God. And of course, you look at it, and Stan and I were talking this week, and it's almost as if you got to be kidding me. I mean, God's going to punish Moses for a technicality? Is that what's going on here? I mean, is our God this God just waiting for us to mess up and then he jumps on us? No. Like the rest of them, far more complicated than that. It's the first month when the whole Israelite community arrived at the desert of Zin and they stayed at Kadesh. All right, you got to, again, if you're just reading through Numbers in your daily Bible reading, you won't see these things because you're simply moving too fast. But if you pause and look at it, you go, okay, in the first month, the whole Israelite community, they come to the desert of Zin and they stayed at Kadesh. Okay, what's going on here? It's the same thing that happened way back in Numbers 13. In Numbers 13, they arrived to spy out the land. Okay, it's time to take the land of Canaan. They rebel. God says, now you've got to wander for 40 years. And now that 40 years is ended, or it's the last of that year, so it's the first month of the 40th year, and they're right back where they started in Kadesh. Okay? They've arrived back where they were when they first spied out the land. And when they get there, you think, okay, things are much better now. All that old generation has died off, and now a new generation has come up, and boy, they're ready to go, right? By the way, have you ever looked in the mirror? Depending on, who you look most like, your mom or dad. Have you ever looked in the mirror and saw your father or your mother looking back at you? I remember the first time I did that. I looked in the mirror and there was my dad. And it freaked me out. Now, I have to admit, June and I have a game that we play. And the game that June and I play is a game of where June does something, and I go, well, Natalie, that was awful nice. Natalie's June's mother's name. Boy, y'all know where this is going, don't you? By the way, this happened like 2 days ago. I said, whoo, you sounded just like your mother. And she looked at me and she said, you really want to go there? Because even though I looked in the mirror and saw my father, I've got to tell you, I'm far more like my mother. And my mother's name was Bonnie. And so June occasionally will say, Bonnie, do we really want to go there? As hard as we try, we still end up. I love the commercials of how you know you're becoming your parents. Those commercials. I love those commercials because they're so true. And so the Israelites, they get there to Kadesh, and right off the bat, there's no water. And guess what? They start complaining. I mean, this is all the way back when they first came out of Egypt over in Exodus. And here they are over 40 years later, and guess what? They're doing the same thing. I mean, they've seen all these miracles, they've seen all these wonders, and yet when things get a little tough and the water begins to run out, they start rebelling again. And so they come up in opposition to Moses and Aaron, they quarreled with them, and man, they said, if we could have just died in the wilderness. Well, don't you love them? I mean, they're just like their moms and dads. If we just died in the wilderness, in fact, why did you even bring us up out of Egypt? And of course, you're like, not many of them got brought up out of Egypt. Yeah. The oldest of that generation, all of those who were 20 and under when they, rebelled the first time, they would have been now up in their 60s. It's been 40 years, and so they're 60 and above. But most of the people who've been born in the wilderness, they didn't come up out of Egypt. But that's what they're saying. Following in the same footsteps as their parents. And so the Lord comes to Moses, just like he did when they first came out. Take the staff, you and your brother Aaron, gather the assembly together. And he says to him, and you got to appreciate this now, y'all. Don't miss this. Speak to that rock before their eyes, and it'll pour out water. And you will bring water out of the rock for the community so they and their livestock can drink. Speak to the rock. Now, I don't know if you remember, but back in Exodus, he had a staff. And God said, you strike the rock. And so, strike the rock. 40 years later, let's just speak to the rock. So Moses took the staff from the Lord's presence just as he commanded. And I love that. With the exception, that's where it ended right there. He took the staff just as God commanded. And then Moses runs off the rails. He and Aaron both do. And what follows, if you just stop for a moment and look at it. First thing he says as he gathers the people. Listen, you rebels. I mean, here's the guy who had interceded for Israel at every turn. I mean, you know, when they were there at the Red Sea and Pharaoh's armies were coming up, and boy, he interceded for them as they cried out, you know, who's going to save us? When they rebelled against God with the golden calf, it was Moses that interceded. He said, you just get out of the way, I'll destroy them all. No, can't destroy your people. When they rebelled, you know, after the spies came back, God said, please remember the kind of God. Every turn, Moses is interceding for the people. But Moses is 120 years old. And he is filled up to here with it. I mean, this is the straw that broke the camel's back. As strong and as amazing as Moses was, you can even push Moses to the breaking point. And so he shouts at them, listen, you rebels! And then that's where he makes the mistake. His emotions get the best of him. Must we bring you water out of this rock? He's standing up there with Aaron. Must we do it? And you're already hearing God go, oh no. No, Moses, don't do this. And then Moses does something that is so out of character with him. Then Moses raised his arm, and you can almost see the anger as he takes his staff. And the first time, evidently, he struck it once. This time, he whacked it twice. And you can imagine just how hard he whacked it. And then the Bible shocks us. Water gushed out, and the community and their livestock drank. Wait a minute. He disobeyed God. He didn't speak to the rock. And yet water came out anyway. What's going on with God? I think what's going on is what oftentimes goes on with God. God honored Moses in the eyes of the Israelites by giving them water, even though it violated God's commandment. God honored Moses. Moses had been leading for 40 years, doing an incredible job. He finally loses it and rebels against God. And when God calls him aside, and this is the thing that's amazing to me. You can almost see God going, okay, you and Aaron, can y'all come over here? I need to talk to y'all. Because I don't think he did it in front of the people, because he honored him in front of the people, because even though he had disobeyed God, God gave them water. But God says to Moses and Aaron, because you did not trust me. You didn't, Moses, trust me. You've trusted me every other time. But today you didn't trust me. And I don't know if Moses and Aaron had, got to talking. The first time you struck the rock. Why in the world? I don't know if you can just speak to a rock and the rock give water. You got to whack that thing with that rod. And you can see Moses going, well, maybe that's what God meant for me to do. Maybe God doesn't want me to speak to it. And you can almost see them as they're questioning, will speaking to a rock really bring water out of it? And God says, and you didn't trust me. And not only did you not trust me in regard with what I asked you to do, but you didn't trust me enough to honor me as holy in the sight of the Israelites. That was why God was so hurt. Because Moses sat there and said, shall we? Shall me and Aaron bring water out of this rock for you? They took their eyes off of God. And I don't know about you, but boy, I struggle and do that just a lot. Of where I think it's in my power, it's in my ability, it's me whacking the rock that's going to bring water out. It's not trusting God and honoring God. And so here is Moses facing this period of just a tragic mistake in his life. And God says, because of that, you'll not bring this community into the land I give you. Now, again, Moses is not lost. It's just that 40 years he had been looking forward to going into the land of Canaan, and God says, no, you're not going to get to do it. And he'll come back and he'll plead with God, please let me lead the people. And God says, don't ask me again. Don't ask me again. Because you've rebelled against me. You didn't trust me. You didn't honor me. And as I've reflected on that this week, I thought, wow, even Moses, an amazing prophet of God, had his weaknesses and failures. Even Moses messed up. And that's the whole point of this text, is that, listen, we can't put our trust, we can't put our faith in human beings. Our faith has to be in God. And that's why it encouraged me so much this week. You go on in 2 chapters later, and you get this strange story of Balaam. And you have Balak's king of Moab, and Israelites are all gathering, about to go into the land. And Balak just absolutely freaks out, and he calls for Balaam. Balaam's this Gentile pagan sorcerer, and yet he's one that God works through. And he hires him to curse the people. And so Balaam comes, and instead of cursing the people, he ends up blessing them. And he blesses them over and over and over and over again. But here's what's so amazing about it. Why? Why is this story found in the book of Numbers? What's God doing? And I think what God's doing is because it comes immediately after Moses rebels. By the way, at the end of chapter 20, Aaron dies. He doesn't enter the land. He dies. We know Moses is fixing to die. And so it's like, okay, so where's our hope? I mean, we know it's in God, but surely God's going to fix this somehow. And Balaam comes, and Balaam, in one of his visions, and one of these blessings he has, he says, can I tell you what the future of Israel is? He says, let me tell you the future. He says, I see him. He sees somebody. But not now. In other words, he's somebody in the future. I behold him, but he's not near. Still a long way off. In fact, a star will come out of Jacob. A scepter will rise out of Israel. And again, if you compare Numbers and all of these oracles of Balaam back to Jacob's quotation in Genesis chapter 49, you see the Holy Spirit blending these prophecies together. You go back to Genesis 49, and this is Israel blessing his sons, and he turns to Judah, and he says, you're a lion's cub. You return from the prey, my son. Like a lion he crouches and lies down. Like a lioness who dares to rouse him. The scepter will not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet until, don't miss this, until he to whom it belongs shall come, and the obedience of the nations shall be his. Do you know that today, believers in one name, Jesus, are gathered in every nation around the world? Why? Giving their obedience in fulfillment to the prophecy of Israel and the prophecy of Balaam. Because you see, our hope is not in Moses. It's not in Abraham. It's not in David. It's not in any human being. But our hope is in God through his Son, Jesus Christ. In fact, Moses, right before he dies, says, the Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet like me, from among you, from your fellow Israelites, and you've got to listen to him. You've got to listen to him. And so, what do we learn? What does this rebellion of Moses teach us about our own relationship with God? I think number one is the importance of realizing that God deserves our honor. He deserves to be honored. You know, I love the fact that in the Ten Commandments, it's not that children are just to obey their parents, but it's to honor. Honor your father and your mother. Honor them. I mean, there is certain individuals, and of course God is at the very top, that deserve to be honored. And of course you honor them by obeying them. I love the Revelation text. To him who sits on the throne and to the Lamb be praise and honor and glory and power forever and ever. God deserves our honor. And we honor him when we do what he tells us to do. Number two, and this one helps me. All of us have our moments of rebellion. All of us do. I don't know about you, but the Lord's Supper is an incredibly bittersweet moment for me. Each week I remember the one who died for me, but also remember why he had to die for me. Because I've rebelled against him. I've sinned against him. And Moses, if Moses could mess up like he did, and God said, you can't enter the promised land because of that. And boy, it doesn't make me feel, okay, yeah, I've messed up a whole lot more than Moses ever did. If we claim to be without sin, John wrote in his latter years, we deceive ourselves. The truth is not in us. But if we confess our sins, he's faithful and just. He'll forgive us our sins and purify us from all unrighteousness. And then the third lesson, we serve a God, and these are the words that Moses used when the people first rebelled way back in the beginning, chapters 13 and 14 of Numbers. We serve a God who is slow to anger, abounding in love, and forgiving sin and rebellion. And I'm glad we do, because I need a God like that. And my guess is you do too. You know, I end with this. It's a little side note. You may have never noticed it, but Jesus goes up on a mountain in Luke chapter 9, and he's up on the mountain, and then he begins to be transfigured. In other words, he begins to kind of look like he did with the glory he had before he took on human flesh. And as he's being transformed and beginning to just be as white as anything could possibly be bleached, there were two men who appeared and started talking with him, and they turned out to be Moses and Elijah. And what a glorious appearance they made. And they talked over Jesus' exodus. You know, with Moses being there in the exodus, it's just amazing. They talked over Jesus' exodus, the one Jesus was about to complete in Jerusalem. I don't know if you ever thought about it, but God said, you're not going to lead these people into the land. But over 1,200, 1,300 years later, God said, hey, Moses. Moses said, yes, Lord. I need you to do me a favor. Sure. Can you and Elijah go down to Canaan's land and meet with my son and encourage him? And I don't know if this really happened, but I just see Moses going, you mean I get to enter the land? You get to enter the land. All right? I mean, I appreciate you. I'm going to let you didn't lead the people in, but you're going. And Moses appears with Elijah inside Canaan's land. But his focus is on Jesus, the same place our focus needs to be. If you've not focused on Jesus, he's the one. He's the star. He's the king. He's the one who never made a mistake, never rebelled. And not only that, because he didn't, he could pay the price for our sin and our rebellion. And if you need that forgiveness of sins, why not come today? If you've never been baptized, put your faith in Jesus. I mean, Jesus put it as simple as could be in Mark 16:16. He that believes and is baptized will be saved. Just do that and receive that wonderful forgiveness. If you have other needs we can help with, we're here to assist you. Come right now as we stand and sing.